Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at 1995 and 1996 Pacific Crown Collection. So, when Pacific started making regular football cards in 1991, they chose not to call their set Pacific. They instead called it Pacific Plus. Did that for a couple of years, then in 1994 they changed the name, and in 1995 they decided to change the name to Pacific Crown Collection, and that's what they were going to call their sets. And thankfully they would just ditch that after a while, but that was the name that they just didn't want to call their card sets Pacific until the end of the decade, when they finally gave in and said, okay, sure, why not? So technically in 1995 and 1996, the name of the Pacific set is Pacific Crown Collection, for what it's worth. And the name does kind of make some sense, but we'll see that in a minute. So for 1995, this was a significant year for Pacific, where they needed to figure out who and what they were. Now that's a reoccurring theme in the sports card market, because 1994 was that year when everybody did the same thing and suddenly everybody realized they had to go off and do their own special thing and figure out who they were. So for Pacific, when they started in 1991 and again in 92 and 93, they had this whole concept of borders. The way that the borders were done was kind of their thing. And then in 1994, like everybody else, they drank the Kool-Aid, lost all of the borders, and just put some gold foil on the card. And they probably had the least successful of all of them. The card just looked terrible. And for 1994, they really should have had a better presence, because they were starting to get discovered that year. So for 1995, they had to rethink the entire model, which is what they went for. And the design that they went with was, well, once again, they went with a virtual full bleed. They went with a 3/4 bleed. And down one side, they put gold foil. And that was it. That's all they did for the card. Now, they did like to show off their really good pictures, and so that was the whole point of this card with no border. The whole point was about the picture. But the picture does get kind of lost if you don't present it right. And with the gold foil on the side, I give them credit for trying. It's the whole jagged edge thing is the top of a crown. So it's a big horizontal crown running along the whole side of the card. That's the concept, and again, that's why they called the set what they did. And they have some intricate detailing inside the crown in order to make it read as kind of fun and cool to look at. But it's a little bit too, well, it's not a little bit, it's way too bold for people to really appreciate it. And if you take the time to look at it, you're going to notice that actually the text for the player name inside the card has a color fade of the two colors of the team. And it looks really good. That part of the card is the one part that's successful, but is very difficult to notice it because of the otherwise overly dominant nature of the whole card. And then they have the card back, which I don't even want to know what happened on this card back. They'd actually been making good card backs through 91 through 93. This is horrible. I mean, absolutely horrendous. I don't even want to look at it anymore, so I'm going to move on. But yeah, that unfortunately happened. But for this card set, what they wanted to do was they wanted to build a theme that they could move forward with that would be the crown, it would be the Pacific theme. And what they wanted was gold foil, which was a big part of the nature of the card company. They were making gold foil cards back in 1991, among the very first to do it. So they wanted to lean in, and all of their base cards were going to have gold foil as a strong theme, but they wanted to get into parallels. That was really the key for Pacific. Parallels was the big thing that would define them moving forward. And they would start off with silver as a parallel, which makes perfect sense because, look, all the way back in 1991 with that gold foil, they also had a silver parallel. Again, among the first to do parallels. So it was perfectly natural for them to have a gold foil and then also have a silver foil parallel. For the other parallel they wanted to do, they went with a platinum blue. Now this is something I got to mention because this is not blue. When they did blue, you could tell blue foil on Pacific cards. It's very strong, very, very clear. But for the platinum blue, that is a very light blue color. It's almost an icy blue, not quite. There's actually a grayish quality to it that is, it's the nature of the platinum color. But platinum is kind of a bluish grayish color. So oftentimes you'll see a pure silver card referred to as platinum. In cards, Pure silver is not used for platinum. It's almost never used for platinum. There are a few times where somebody will make a mistake, but for the most part, they don't. So for 1995, for sure, if somebody says platinum, they're referring to the light blue card. It's not a heavy blue, you're not going to run into that. Silver is just a pure silver. So that's the way the parallels worked, and the entire set was done that way. The set did have some rookies, but instead of stuffing them at the back, the rookies are with every single team. They're just, in their college uniform, and there's no distinction at all for them being rookies, which again, that's kind of a tradition that Pacific had picked up very recently, which I don't think was a strength, but that's the way the cards ended up. But they do have a couple of cards in the set that break it up a bit. So any player who had been in the NFL for 10 or more years, they made a logo to go on it, which was an Iron Man logo. That was the little logo that they went for. So every single player who'd been around for a decade, they got a bit of a celebration with Iron Man. That little logo really did kind of break the setup a bit, which is really pretty cool. And then they did nothing else for the card set. So that was the card set. For inserts, they were now starting to lean pretty heavily into inserts. And the first insert to talk about is their Gems of the Crown. This was an insert set they started in 1994 and wanted to use it as a tradition. And for 1995, this is a super, super bold card. I mean, really, they used a gold rainbow holofoil around the outside, and they actually have some relief on the card. There's a tactility to it. That's what I want to say. You don't really notice it because the rainbow holofoil is so strong it overpowers everything else. It's not a subtle card in any way. And yeah, so they did that. And then they had a set called G-Force. And G-Force, Ground Force, is a card that actually has relief on the surface. It's not like the tactility of the Gems of the Crown. This is a very serious relief, not embossing, but it's enough that the card has an effect with light that's kind of cool, where you can see the relief on it. That's it. Otherwise, it's a pretty boring card. So it's got a fun little gimmick that goes along with it. Then they also had a set called the Gold Crown Die Cuts. And Gold Crown Die Cuts is a nod to the set that they released in 1995 called Crown Royale. Now, Crown Royale is the first fully die-cut card set released in packs. In fact, it's almost the first die-cut cards released in packs, except we'd seen a little bit in 1994 with some pretty thick cards. Well, Crown Royale was a very, very, very delicate card. The detailing of the die cutting was great, but also the cards were very thin. So these cards were just super, super delicate. And for Pacific, they wanted to kind of make a nod to that. So they made an insert set called Gold Crown Die Cuts. This, not horizontal like the Crown Royale, this is a vertical card with the crown finial up at the top. Otherwise, it's very similar in terms of the crown itself. The card at the bottom is pretty clunky in Pacific. The Gold Crown Die Cuts just, they stopped thinking when they got to the bottom. But the set does have a parallel, and that is a rainbow holofoil parallel. These cards are not more difficult to get, it's just that they have the two different versions that these come in. So it is essentially two 20 card sets or one 40 card set that you'd have to pursue in order to complete it all. So that was the next insert set. And then they also had a set called Kramer's Choice. And the Kramer's Choice cards are a very small set of 6 cards of star players, in basically the best players that the president of the company, Kramer, that he chose, Michael Kramer. And these cards are designed they're all die cut, they're regular card size, but they're die cut like it's kind of like a pyramid, a crystal pyramid. And they used a silver holofoil for the pyramid theme on the card. They have some etch marks that are put onto it, so there's some detailing that's kind of interesting. But this card is significant because over in Crown Royale, they had box toppers that were the exact same cards as these in the set. Every single card, number-wise and player-wise, with the exception of card number 1. So in this set, card number 1 is Ki-Jana Carter. You go over to Crown Royale, card number 1 is actually Rashaan Salam. So they have the 2 different running backs that are different. Otherwise, all the rest of the cards are the same. So you have the regular card size that was released in the Pacific Crown Collection packs, and then over in Crown Royale, they had a box topper. And the way you can tell the difference, because the box toppers are a lot easier to get, the way you can tell the difference is usually people will say jumbo, but if they don't, look at the score marks in the prism effect. And those on the regular card are just a single mark. But you can't, everything doubles when you make the jumbo card. And so that means those marks are going to get wider, but they don't get deeper. So what they did instead for the jumbos is they actually widened it out and made a little flat surface inside. So if you look at the card, you'll see 2 lines parallel for each one of those marks in the jumbo. In the regular card, it's just a single line. So that's the way you can tell if somebody's trying to sell you a jumbo card but pass it off as a regular size card. But otherwise, the set, again, other than the 2 players, is the exact same. And then when you do a lot of inserts, there's usually a dud. And the dud for this set is Hometown Heroes. This is, I mean, it's got some platinum foil on the card. It's kind of a prismatic effect that it has, or a holofoil effect. But it is the platinum blue effect, and that's about all there is to say about it. Then they also have their Rookies 95 set. This is an insert set looking at top rookies from the draft. The cards, other than the player in his college uniform, they actually look pretty decent. But in the text for the Rookies 95 theme along the side, they have a holofoil, but the holofoil has an effect in it that's kind of like rain, or it's a cool effect that they built into it that is, I think, the first time this would ever be done. We'd see it from time to time moving forward, but for this effect at this point, this was pretty bold. And the last insert set they did for 1995 was their Young Warriors. And Pacific was all about some really gaudy, bold gold foil. And in 1996, we were about to see them really hit the extreme with it. For 1995, it was kind of like a warm-up act with their Young Warriors set, where these cards are just covered in gold foil. But there's a lot of intricate design elements that go into it that make this card interesting. So that helps. But like I said, it is a ton of gold foil. And Pacific would do this from time to time moving forward. This is the first opportunity to see it. And so for 1995, that's what they did. They built a set that now had parallels, which is good, and they had a bunch of inserts, and so they were starting to get their footing under themselves. And in fact, they would use this model with very little variation moving forward. So for 1996, where would they take this? Well, they took the same concept of a 3/4 bleed with gold foil on one side, and they dropped the gold foil down to the bottom. Instead of making a super intricate border that just didn't really work the previous year, they went with a big panel that was like a football field down at the bottom with a logo. It is a little bit better, but I do wish that they had used the intricacy down here at the bottom. I think it would have worked a lot better overall. But at any rate, they did this big gold field because, well, the set was all about parallels. And since there's nothing else to talk about with the set, they didn't even do anything like the Iron Man theme on these cards, so we're just getting straight into the parallels. And obviously they started off with a silver parallel because, you know, why wouldn't they do that? They're naturally going to have gold and silver as their base. They also did a blue parallel in 1996. So instead of doing platinum blue, they did a full blue parallel. But they had a third parallel as well, and that was red. And so now they have a red parallel, they have a silver parallel, and they have a blue parallel, which just looks really patriotic, which was cool. I like that they did that. I thought that was a cool nod. And that was the main set. I mean, the card back was a little bit better, but other than that, there's nothing else to talk about with the set. So it's time to get into the inserts. And we start off with, well, Gems of the Crown. Now, for 1996, Gems of the Crown was finally starting to get designed well. This was fun. They still had a fair amount of gold foil on it, and they were starting to get into some interesting color fades on their cards. We were seeing a little bit in 1995, but by 1996 they were getting more into working in some gorgeous color fades into a whole combination of design. And with Gems of the Crown, you can see they're starting to figure this out and make a card that actually has a really rich design quality that looks just cool. And then they also did their Gold Crown die cuts again. And for Gold Crown die cuts, they used the same theme. The crown up at the top now has more of an etched effect inside of it, which goes along with what they were doing with the actual 96 Crown Royale. So again, it has kind of a nod to a preview for the Crown Royale set. But down at the bottom, now they're actually designing it well. So the card looks good at the top and it looks good at the bottom. And they did do a parallel as well for this, but instead of doing an equal parallel, this is a more difficult parallel, and it's silver, or I think, well, I think it's referred to as platinum. This gets annoying to me because it's a silver parallel, and I'm just going to call it a silver parallel. But you may see it referred to as platinum. Doesn't matter. There's the gold version and there's the non-gold version. And the silver version is individually serial numbered out of 500. Every single card has that serial numbering. So it's a much rarer parallel to get. And now in 1996, they were starting to get into serial numbering, which is something we would see a lot moving down the road. But at any rate, here we get to see it with this parallel. And they again did the Kramer's Choice cards. This is a bigger set. The card is very similar in the design. I mean, it's very clear to tell the difference between 95 and 96 and on. But they again did the jumbo versions with Crown Royale. However, the numbers are different between the two sets. So even though all 10 players who are featured in the regular card size or the miniature version, all 10 of those players show up in the jumbos as well, the numbers are all different. So if you look at the numbers, that will tell you whether it's a jumbo or whether it's a regular, but you got to know. Then they had an insert set called Bomb Squad, and Bomb Squad is kind of a chrome-like finish. Now, it's interesting where when you look at the effect of all of the relief on the card, it has an effect that's very similar to brushed metal. You may have noticed that back with the Young Warriors cards. Now, the Young Warriors cards also did not have actual brushed metal, but the way that the light worked on it was kind of cool. So they were doing that again here with this card, but this is a two-front card. Again, something they were starting to experiment with. So the two-front card allows you to have two players, one on either side, which work together as a tandem. So in card pages, this doesn't work very well doubled up, but there you go. Then they have a card set called Cardsupials. And Cardsupials is something that they would do a couple of different times. This is a card that is very similar in size to a regular card, except it has a pouch on the back, and then there's a mini card that gets inserted in. The mini card is a fourth the size of the regular card, and every single player who has a full-size card also has a mini card. In the pack where these came, you got both of them, so there was a mini card stuffed into the regular card, but they were not the same player, so it was a mix and match. You had to go through a lot of packs to be able to put together the entire set, both the regular card as well as the mini. Cardsupial obviously refers to marsupial, which is a pouched animal like a kangaroo, and so that was the concept. Then they had a card set called Power Core, and this is a card that again uses a lot of gold foil on it, and it is it's a decent enough set. But these cards also have a chromed parallel, which is a lot harder to get. And this chromed parallel actually looks chromed, whereas for the Bomb Squad, it looks more like kind of like a metal surface that has a chrome-like quality. This has a really chromed surface on it. So these cards come in both different versions. Then the last insert set they had was the Zone. And this is a die-cut card set where they have a goalpost on the back. And these are pretty delicate because they're the normal size of a regular card, but they have that narrow spot where the goalpost is. These cards can bend really easily, so you got to be super, super careful with them. Thankfully, they would only do this for 2 years, but here in 1996, it was the first year they did it. And that was their 96 set. So that's what you got in packs of 95 and then packs of 96. But there was one other thing to mention about 1996, which was their Super Bowl experience cards. This was a small card set of a couple of young players. The cards have a very light gold, kind of a white gold kind of a look for the foil around the outside. But the cards also all came with a copper parallel as well. So there are two versions of each one of these cards. One with a very light gold foil and the other with a very heavy copper foil. Copper is something we would see a lot from Pacific in the years to come, but for Pacific proper, this was the first time. And that was it. That was 95 and 96 Pacific. There's actually a fair amount to talk about with it, but there's not enough to do standalone videos, which I would prefer doing, but you can see how 95 kind of turned into 1996. I'm going to be looking at the other sets moving forward down the road, because obviously we've been talking for quite a while. So do watch out for those videos. If you haven't seen the previous videos that I've done on Pacific trading cards, definitely check those out. If you haven't subscribed, I do urge you to do so. And thank you very much for watching.